Hey guys, happy Saturday. As you can see on the clock down here, I am here way too late, but it's because I went all nerd style and figured out a new way to use this program, and I think this is going to be really helpful to make the videos more meaningful for you, but also shorter. And this way you don't have to spend as much time just watching the video. You can spend more time going back to those sections that maybe you want to review, also more time to actually process. So enough of me talking, let me just show you. So, oh, check that out. Fancy. Basically, today we're going to be focusing on the Crusades. And like we said in class on Friday, the Crusades are a chance to see how the influence of the Catholic Church actually starts to affect the politics of post-classical Europe. And so, to start us off, what are the Crusades? Well, glad I asked. The Crusades are a series of military expeditions from 1095, and this is CE, so this is after Christ. But it's a series of military expeditions from 1095 CE to 1291 CE. And they were first sent by this guy named Pope Urban II. So Pope, meaning he's in charge of the Catholic Church. So already we have this weird situation where we have a Catholic Pope sending military expeditions to a foreign land. So obviously these, like, politics, religion is getting very mixed up in this whole situation. And the purpose was to recapture the Holy Land from these Islamic Turks, known as the Seljuk Turks. So, for us to understand this, what we're going to focus on are causes and effects. And so we're going to start off by talking about short-term causes, basically like what immediately starts the Crusades, and then we'll move on and talk about, some of the longer-term causes, things that were basically building up that made the Crusades seem like a really good idea. And then we'll finish up by discussing the effects, how this plays out in European society. So the short-term cause, the thing that immediately sets off the Crusades, is that this Turkish Islamic group known as the Seljuks invaded the Holy Land and prevented Christians from making pilgrimages to Jerusalem. So the Turks, the Seljuks, are originally from Central Asia, up here on the coast of the Caspian Sea. They're a nomadic group. So like the Mongols, like the Arabs, and so on, this nomadic group from Central Asia invades down into here and starts basically taking over and invading these empires that existed there. And what ends up happening is that the Seljuks, they invade the Abbasid Caliphate, but they also start pushing into the Byzantine Empire. And that's what you're seeing here. And basically, when this happens, the Byzantine Emperor writes a letter to the Pope asking for assistance. He basically is like, oh my gosh, these Muslims are invading our empire, it's terrible, please send me some troops to help us resist this invasion. And in return, the Pope, who again is Pope Urban II, he calls on European Christians to take up arms, to push back into the Holy Land and basically fight for the cause of God. And one of the big things here, one of the reasons that so many people actually take up arms, is that the Pope promises that anyone who goes on this crusade, basically if you go and you fight against the Muslims and you try and take back the Holy Land, he promised that you would earn salvation. So basically, if you go and fight against this Islamic group, these Seljuk Turks, and try and retake the Holy Land here, you're going to go to heaven. In spite of any bad things you may have done, all the sins you've committed, that would basically save you and allow you to go to heaven. So thousands, tens of thousands, some estimates say up to 100,000 people from Western Europe unite, well, they don't unite, but they take up arms and start going on these crusades. So to understand that basically helps us to see why this begins in the first place. But we also want to understand why the people in Western Europe, and especially why the Pope actually does anything about this. Because the Pope, remember, is not friends with the Byzantine Emperor. So that's where we're going to go to these long-term causes. And really, the long-term cause really comes down to this one thing. By the way, this is Pope Urban II, an attractive guy here. So the long-term cause really comes down to one thing. And basically that is the Pope wants some power. And not just some power, but the Pope wants to gain a lot of power. Do you see how the quote thing here is coming from Rome? Yeah, Prezi. Okay, sorry. So the first way in which the Pope wants to gain some power, and that's what this background map is showing, is he wants to bring the Eastern Orthodox Church back under the influence of the Catholic Church. So what this map is showing is basically anything that's in this pinkish salmon color. These are the areas that were Catholic. So these are the areas that are under the control of the Catholic Church in Rome. Right. On the flip side, over here, all the stuff that's in yellow, and it expands up into Russia, all the stuff that's in yellow is part of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Remember, that was the church of the Byzantine Empire. And then finally, all the, I don't even know what color this is, grayish, bluish, greenish, whatever. These are all areas that are mainly Islamic. So mostly Muslims living in those areas. So basically, in this sense, the Pope calls for the Crusades to try and make the Byzantine world reliant on the West, basically dependent on them, and hoping that the Byzantine world is going to become Catholic again. So that's the first long-term cause. The second long-term cause really has a lot to do with the structure of the feudal system. And this is the same chart that we analyzed the other day, and the part of it that we focused on was the king exchanging land to the nobles in exchange for their fealty and their service, and then on down the line. But we also mentioned that the church fits into this feudal system as well. And the reality is that this actually causes a lot of problems in European society. And this issue becomes known as the investiture controversy. So here's what this all comes down to. Basically, in the early on in the feudal age, nobles and kings had the power to appoint local bishops. Here's why. Because technically, the king controls all of the land in his kingdom, right? And he has the power to give that land to nobles. And then on the flip side, the nobles control the land that they're given, and they have the power to give that land to knights and so on. So basically, when a bishop is given a chunk of land, the bishop basically becomes the knight or the noble, basically the lord of that land. So when the church is given the land, they get to control it. They're essentially the lord of the land. So in a way, the practice of appointing bishops really falls under the right of the lord or the right of the king, based on their feudal power, based on the way that this feudal system is set up. Now, on the flip side, the Catholic Church basically makes the point that God granted religious authority to the church alone. Basically, that the Catholic Church has sole religious authority throughout Europe. And basically, so they're arguing that even though the king is giving the land to the church, it's still the church's right to appoint the bishop. Now, basically, what ends up happening is that they go back and forth and they debate this for a while, but ultimately, this ends up leading to decades of war, open fighting between the Pope, who raises his own armies, and various kings throughout Europe. And ultimately, the result is that the Pope's armies end up winning, which really that says a lot about the power and the influence that the Pope had in Europe. Like we said on Friday, the church was the largest landowner, the largest single landowner, and so because they control all that land, they're able to raise a lot of tax money to support themselves, and with that money they can afford to raise large armies. And so some scholars, a lot of scholars argue that the Crusades were really the first chance for the Pope to reinforce this newfound power that he has. Essentially, I just won this battle over, such and such king. It's King Henry IV, by the way. I just won this war against King Henry IV. Well, now, why don't I call on him to send his armies over to the Middle East just to reinforce, just to prove that I have power over him? The last long-term cause, so the third long-term cause, really comes down to the way that the feudal system works. Basically, the feudal system, like we said, works by exchanging land to nobles in exchange for those nobles supporting the king and giving him service. But basically, for it to work, the king has to have land to give to the nobles. Well, by the 11th century, so basically in around 1000, Europe is all the land in Europe is pretty much claimed, and that's what you're seeing here. The Kingdom of France controls all this, the Kingdom of England here, Ireland there, the Holy Roman Empire, which we're not going to get bogged down into the details of this. It's not holy, it's not Roman, it's technically not an empire, whatever. But the point is, by the 11th century, there's not any more land to take. There's no more land to give. And so what this creates is greater rivalry between kingdoms. You see more conflict with England fighting France, France fighting Spain, the Holy Roman Empire fighting the Polish, and so on. And in addition to that, actually, even within the kingdoms, knights begin to turn on their lords. And so essentially, the Pope, seeing this, and this is after the investiture controversy, the Pope now has a lot of authority. The Pope sees this and basically says, well, we shouldn't be fighting each other, we should be fighting these guys. So we have a bunch of knights who don't have land and they're trained warriors and they want to fight. Well, let's send them over here and let's have them fight these Muslims and try and kick them out of the Holy Land. So in this case, the long-term cause really has to do with problems with the feudal system. And basically, when you run out of land to reward, things start breaking down. All right. So at this point, that explains why the Crusades happened.